Imagine you're standing before a woman. She's already underestimated you, tested your limits, provoked reactions, ignored your gestures, and yet you stayed. You tried to prove your worth. You tried to convince her you were worthy. But it was only when you stood up, turned your back, and disappeared without warning that something changed in her. Her gaze deepened. Her curiosity grew. Her mind, which previously treated you as predictable, now haunts you with a question she'll never admit aloud. Why did he leave just now? This is the cruelest contradiction of female nature. Often respect only arises when you stop explaining yourself. And no, this isn't a cliché. It's psychology, it's neuroscience, and above all, it's instinct. The same instinct that makes an animal respect another that doesn't bow down. The truth is, in the invisible theater of seduction, the figure who walks away silently has more power than the one who cries out for justice. Do you know what makes this reality even more frightening? It's because she exposes an entire system of advice that has been shoved down men's throats for decades. Be understanding, show you care, prove you're different from the others. But nobody warned you what happens when you give too much. You bleed, and those who bleed attract predators. Every time you swallow disrespect, a mind game, a deliberate silence, you're sending a message. And her brain, calibrated by thousands of years of evolution, understands this signal better than any words. This man accepts little. Therefore, he's worth little. You can be a genius. You can be faithful, handsome, and generous. If you don't know when to disappear, all of that will be emotional garbage in her eyes. It's this disruption that breaks down defenses. It's this silence that generates tension. And tension, when used well, transforms into respect. In some cases, even desire. But nobody teaches you this. On the contrary, the modern world stifles this masculine instinct. It teaches men to seek approval, to be nice, to apologize for being men. Masculinity has become a walking apology. And there lies the irony. The more gentle you try to be, the more predictable you become. And predictability is the coffin of attraction. Therefore, today we're going to dissect the most sinister and at the same time most strategic reason why a woman only starts to respect you when you refuse to stay where you're not valued. It's not about empty pride. It's about emotional survival, about keeping your masculine energy intact, about understanding the game before being sacrificed by it. Staying? That word sounds noble, mature, even romantic, especially when the whole world seems to revolve around the fear of abandonment. But the reality is more brutal. Many men don't stay out of courage. They stay out of weakness. They stay out of fear. They stay because they don't know what they are, without the validation of that woman who already disrespects them in silence. And here's the problem. The female instinct is highly trained to detect this weakness, disguised as loyalty. The woman feels it. She may not rationalize it, but she knows. She looks at you and realizes this man is stuck with me out of necessity, not choice. And from that moment on, she stops respecting you. And worse, she doesn't even know exactly why. It's not about you being worthless. It's about you not knowing how to remove him from the table when she no longer deserves him. This is where psychological addiction is born. The dopamine from the slightest attention becomes a drug for a collapsing ego, and what seemed like love becomes a symptom. If I can get her to look at me again, I'll feel like a man again. What he doesn't realize is that the more he begs, the more he crumbles in her eyes. Not because she's cruel, but because human nature despises what it accepts being devalued. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. It's one of the most effective methods for creating behavioral addiction. The human mind responds more intensely when the reward is unstable. That's why casinos are addictive. And that's why so many toxic relationships become obsessive. The woman offers emotional crumbs, and the man is grateful like a dog trained for shocks and treats. He doesn't realize he's being conditioned, and the more crumbs he accepts, the more he destroys his masculine energy. This energy isn't about testosterone. It's about inner structure, about knowing that you don't need to bend over backwards to be loved, that you can leave a place and still remain whole, and that's so rare today. It's become almost mythical. Most men are thirsty for validation, like soldiers who have lost their way. They don't walk. They crawl emotionally, seeking approval even in cold silences. And that's where the tragedy lies. The woman even unconsciously loses interest. She finds herself facing a man who is incapable of protecting himself, of distancing himself, of imposing silence, and if he can't protect himself from her, how could he protect her from life? The feminine instinct seeks strength, and strength in this context is not brutality. It's emotional autonomy. The man who knows how to leave is the man who leaves her uneasy. What lingers too long becomes scenery, becomes certainty, becomes a thing. Machiavelli in The Prince stated that a ruler should avoid being loved to the point of appearing weak and hated to the point of being eliminated. The same applies to the emotional game. The man who tries to be loved at any cost loses authority, and authority for women is an aphrodisiac. No matter how much modernity tries to deny it, it's in the species' genetic code. That's why staying when you should have left is costly. It costs dignity. It costs perceived value. It costs silent masculinity, the kind that doesn't need explaining because it's fully present. Think of a classic example. The nice guy who becomes a doormat. He listens to all her complaints. He's always available, always ready to prove he's different. And in the end, she chooses the man who challenges her, who stands up for himself, who knows when to step back without becoming the villain. Why? Because the man who silently walks away communicates something ancestral. I am whole without you. And this wholeness creates impact. Silence in this case speaks louder than declarations. And here's the critical point. You may even be the good catch, but if she doesn't feel you have the real option to leave, you'll never be a priority. You'll be convenient. This isn't an empty theory. It's biology. Studies in social psychology demonstrate that individuals considered scarce, emotionally or physically, are perceived as more valuable. Scarcity increases desire. And the opposite is also true. Over-availability destroys the perception of value. Robert Greene, in The Art of Seduction, shows that mystery, strategic distance, and detachment are weapons of power. It's not about playing games. It's about keeping the magnetism alive. What is always within reach doesn't generate tension, and without tension, there is no seduction. The man who stays when he is ignored, disrespected, or tested beyond his limit is not being noble. He is being complicit in his own downfall. Do you want to be respected? Then disappear when that respect is violated. And not with drama, not with threats, with elegant coldness, with a silent presence. Because that's what hurts. The disappearance without warning. The absence that doesn't beg for return. The ending that doesn't ask for explanation. And perhaps the most frightening thing of all is that at that very moment, somewhere in her mind, the man who left remains more alive than all those who stayed. That's the hidden price of not knowing how to leave. And most only realize this when they've already become irrelevant, when they've already become the emotional doormat of the story. You can have everything: beauty, money, intelligence, sensitivity, and still be discarded like an old rag, not because you lack something, but because deep down, she knows she would never lose you. And that absolute certainty of your eternal presence is the death sentence of attraction. The female mind needs an element that civilization tries to hide, but that the unconscious demands: risk. Yes. The risk of loss, of silence, of absence, of doubt. Total security may be great for a stable relationship, but it's terrible for keeping desire alive. Because desire is born from the conflict between certainty and mystery, and you being 100% predictable becomes a book she's already read 1,000 times and doesn't want to reread. This is the truth that modern romanticism doesn't tell. While you think love is strengthened by always being available, always understanding, always present, her brain is begging for something that will sweep her off her feet. For a real threat of loss, for a man who can be a gift, but never a possession. And no, this isn't about playing games. It's about neuroscience. The limbic system responsible for emotions responds more intensely to stimuli involving uncertainty. When you show that you can leave, that you're not an emotional hostage, that your world doesn't revolve around her attention, you activate the alert center, the same one that deals with scarcity. The result? She values you more. She observes you more. She desires you more. But nobody teaches you this. The world says, be nice, be patient, be the one who stays even when she freaks out. But the more predictable you become, the more invisible you become. The irony is devastating. The man who is always there is the first one she forgets. That's why men with emotionally inaccessible, cold, unpredictable, and even problematic profiles often generate more obsession than stable men. Because the female mind instinctively values what it cannot control, what it can lose. This is why the too good to be good man is often rejected, not because he's bad, but because he doesn't offer a challenge. And without a challenge, there's no projection. And without projection, there's no fascination. Deep down, every woman wants to feel that she needs to be good enough to deserve him. And if you're always there begging for approval, she feels she doesn't need to do anything. And what doesn't require effort doesn't generate value. Let's go deeper. In evolutionary psychology, attraction is a biological tool of selection. Women historically sought signs of protection, capability, strength, and emotional strength is a scarcity of need. A man who can leave at any moment but chooses to stay conveys power. A man who can't leave even when mistreated conveys dependence. Independence is the greatest repellent there is. Think of the paradox. Men who treat women as an absolute priority from the very first moment are often discarded. Those who prioritize their own goals, their silence, their strategic distance, become enigmas that women can't get out of their heads. Because the fear of loss creates narrative, and narrative creates emotion, and emotion is the language of desire. Do you know why James Bond remains an icon of seduction to this day? He doesn't beg. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't seek approval. And every woman who crosses his path knows he can stay, but he can also disappear without a trace. In the female subconscious, this is a challenge, and challenges activate libido. And before you think, but that's just fiction, look around. How many times have you seen women obsessed with men who didn't answer messages, who disappeared, who gave ambiguous signals? It's not because these men were better. It's because they felt they could lose them at any moment. And this awakens something primal. Competition, proof of worth, urgency. That's the point. Respect doesn't come from what you give. It comes from what you are capable of taking away. That's why male silence, well applied, is worth more than 1,000 sweet words. When you disappear, not to punish, but because you respect yourself, you plant a doubt that no certainty could cause. Is he tired of me? Has he moved on? Is he with someone else? These questions are weapons, and they only arise when there's a real risk of loss. Attraction needs this. It needs the imbalance between what she wants to know and what you let show. And it's in this imbalance that respect arises because you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is dangerous, and everything that is dangerous is respected. Therefore, the brutal truth is this. You can be incredible, but if she's absolutely certain you'll never leave, you'll never again be seen as a man. You'll be seen as a crutch, as a plan B, as the one who's always there when the world falls apart. Do you want to be that guy? Fine. But don't be surprised if she trades you for the first idiot who treats her with even the slightest bit of strategic coldness. Because that idiot, even without knowing it, awakens something you never could. The feeling that she could lose you. Is that ugly? Is it cruel? Maybe, but it's real. And that's what separates the men who generate desire from those who generate comfort. And the most dangerous thing, too much comfort kills desire. That's why every man needs to understand the difference between love and attachment, between care and submission, between presence and strategic absence. Only the man who knows when to withdraw has the power to be desired in his absence. Only the man who doesn't need to beg is remembered with desire. And only the man who imposes silence is heard even when he doesn't speak. There's a dangerous illusion in many men's minds that persistence is proof of love, that fighting to the end is noble, that a true man never gives up. But seduction isn't war, and in many cases, walking away is more seductive, more impactful than remaining and fighting for something that no longer has reciprocity. Fascination doesn't arise from continuous effort. It arises from unexpected interruption, from disappearance without scandal, from an absence that silences the entire atmosphere. And this isn't a theory. It's a historical pattern. Cleopatra knew how to disappear at the height of someone else's obsession. Casanova withdrew when his wife thought she dominated him. Don Draper, a symbolic figure of magnetic masculinity, seduced precisely because he knew the exact moment to be silent and disappear. Because what leaves at the peak remains in memory. The problem is that the average man has been trained to do the opposite. Prove you deserve it. Hold on. Show you're different from the others. And so, he remains in relationships where admiration no longer exists. trying to regain with logic what was lost through instinct. But instinct doesn't respond to arguments. It responds to impact. And there is no more powerful impact than the silence of someone who always spoke. The woman may not admit it, but she feels it. When you leave, when you don't argue, when you don't beg, you create a space, an emotional vacuum, a blank mirror, where she sees herself alone and begins to question everything. Why did he leave? Did he get tired? Does he still think about me? Is he already with someone else? These questions, all silent, are more effective than any speech. Strategic absence is not an escape, it's dominance. It's knowing that seduction is also done with shadows, with enigma, with what you don't reveal. And this is the paradox. Often, the woman who rejects you arrogantly desires you furiously after you calmly leave because silence forces her to create answers. And the human brain hates unanswered questions. That's why she'll start thinking about you again. She'll rummage through memories. She'll reinterpret conversations. And all of this without you lifting a finger. This is the power of walking away without a scene, without accusation, without resentment. Because in that gesture, you communicate something that no long text would ever say. I am above this. And what is above is admired. It is desired. It is remembered. And before you think this is manipulation, think again. It's self-worth. It's emotional intelligence. It's understanding that you don't earn respect by offering everything. You earn it when you're able to withdraw everything without warning. Of course, this requires control. It requires mastery of one's own ego. Because the instinct of a wounded man is to scream, justify, blame, demand explanations. But the man who transcends this instinct becomes magnetic. He becomes an unbearable absence. He becomes a biting memory. And this is where you begin to understand the height of seduction isn't always the kiss. It isn't always the bed. Often, it's the silence. It's the moment when you become untouchable simply because you are no longer there. This is the legacy of great seducers. They don't just conquer bodies, they conquer minds. And a mind never forgets who left before becoming disposable. So understand this. There's more power in a smart exit than in desperate staying. The man who insists too much becomes a burden. The one who leaves too soon becomes a mystery. But the one who leaves at the right time, that one becomes a legend. And you? Will you continue fighting for someone who doesn't see you? Or will you learn the most underrated art of seduction, the art of leaving while there's still time? Because the right exit, made with poise and silence, has more power than 1,000 attempts to win back what's already lost. And the cruelest part, she'll only realize this when you're already too far away to come back. She doesn't want a man who loses himself in her. She wants a man who makes her lose herself in him. And that only happens when you understand the invisible game that governs desire. When you stop trying to please, when you step out of the position of value tester and become the one who sets the emotional pace of the relationship, you don't need to be more handsome or richer. You just need to learn to control what other men give away for free, their own energy. Because the man who masters his own behavior masters attraction. And that's not theory. That's psychology. That's strategy. And if you felt all this makes sense, if you realize the mistakes you've been making, and if you want practical access to the map that transforms this awareness into action, then the next step is inevitable. Listen to the Seducer's blueprint to create instant desire. This 7-part course will show you how desire is activated in real time through posture, silence, eye contact, and strategic communication. You'll learn why most words fail, how to create emotional tension in under a minute, and how to leave a lasting impression without forcing anything. This isn't a theory. It's practical, immediate, and unapologetically real. What's inside isn't politically correct, but it works. That's why it's forbidden. If you're tired of being overlooked, tired of doing everything right and getting nothing back, this is the shift. Attraction stops being about pleasing and starts being about provoking. Click the link below, access the full course, and become the kind of man who doesn't chase attention but makes it inevitable.